I think you can tell a lot about a person based on what their favourite episode of Batman the Animated Series is. For some people, it doesn't get any better than On Leather Wings. This episode was the first to be made and features some really spectacular visuals. It set the tone of the series perfectly by being a dark mystery focused on an underused villain from the comics. People that place this episode at the top of the pedestal are likely fans of the craft of animation and really appreciate the artistry of the episode. Others may cite Heart of Ice as their favourite episode, the episode that redefined the one-note ice-themed villain Mr. Freeze. To me, this suggests that they value the writing. It won an Emmy after all, especially scripts drenched in tragedy and pathos. And if anyone says I've got Batman in my basement is their favourite episode, well, get them checked into Arkham as soon as possible. They're a danger to themselves and everyone around them.
Penguin.
The episode that spoke to me the most and impacted me as a child is the phenomenal episode Two-Face Part 1. The fact that this episode took a pre-existing character, Harvey Dent, someone we knew from previous episodes, and saw them descend into madness adds an extra layer that you just don't get from the other Villain of the Week origin episodes. Now don't get me wrong, I love the Villain of the Week origin episodes, but the fact that Harvey was someone that we already knew and had a connection with makes his downfall all the more engaging. There's something about Harvey Dent's struggle with his anger and his subsequent fall from grace that stayed with me. The episode manages to perfectly balance action and plot, and it's brilliantly paced with scarcely a wasted moment. Everything that happens in this episode is significant and furthers the plot. From the offset, we're treated to Two-Face's theme being played on what sounds like a recorder, a simple wind instrument that is mostly played by children. The beauty of using this instrument is that it suggests childhood, which is a very smart way of connecting it to the root of Harvey's mental health problem. The best Batman villains represent a part of Batman, offering us a glimpse at what could have been if Batman was not so resolute in his cause. And no other villain is as similar to Batman as Two-Face is. Harvey Dent is a crusader for justice, fighting against corruption while operating within the limits of the law. And the stress of his campaign for justice and all the hurdles placed in his path really takes a toll on him mentally. When the episode begins, we see Harvey's dreams where he's being pursued by a sinister voice. We never clearly see the figure that the voice belongs to, but the silhouette makes it pretty clear that this mysterious figure is in fact Harvey himself. Whenever we see Harvey battling with his inner demon, his face becomes drenched in sweat, his eyes bulging out of his head. Keep this image in mind because it'll come up again later on. This episode was directed by arguably the best director of the bunch, Kevin Altieri. If he's not the best, then he's certainly the most dynamic. He and his team of storyboard artists came up with some really inventive and atmospheric shots. I particularly enjoy the use of shadows and silhouettes, such as this early scene where Batman helps catch Thorne's henchmen during a raid. Batman is backlit when he drops into the factory with his form shrouded in shadow. We only really see his hand as he playfully taps the shoulder of one of the henchmen before he begins brutalizing them. There's some really good comedic timing here with the exaggerated shocked expression on the henchman's face before we cut to outside and start seeing objects and people being thrown through the windows. I find it really refreshing how Batman's barely in this episode. Yes, we do see Bruce Wayne a few times, but he is a supporting character. Harvey Dent is the star of this episode. As has been previously established in Pretty Poison, Bruce Wayne and Harvey Dent are longtime friends, which adds a different dynamic to the relationship. Writer Frank Miller introduced the idea of Harvey Dent working with Batman during the seminal Year One storyline, but the BTAS team decided to flip this relationship on its head by having Bruce be Harvey's friend, and this adds an additional personal layer whenever Batman has to deal with Two-Face. Anyway, while Dent proclaims the raid a huge success to the media, a relatively insignificant act of a goon kicking mud on his suit leads to our first proper look at Big Bad Harv. We see Harvey initially with an expression of shock, maybe a little confusion, unsure at how to react for a brief second before his face contorts into a scowl. The background begins to turn red, code for anger, indicating that Big Bad Harv is coming out to play. I have to wonder if perhaps the original script called for the goon to kick mud in Harvey's face, potentially covering half of it as an act of foreshadowing, but perhaps that was a little too on the nose. There is of course a much better blink and you'll miss it hint later on. Either way, this scene tells us that Harvey is starting to lose control. Cut to a campaign rally for Harvey Dent at Palatial Wayne Manor, and we see an ice sculpture of Justice. The steady melting is reminiscent of Harvey sweating when he starts to lose control, and it's a nice visual metaphor for Harvey Dent. It also tells us that justice in Gotham is slowly melting away. Here we meet Harvey Dent's latest girlfriend, Grace Lamont. We're not told much about Grace, but the tie-in novelisation tells us that she is also a lawyer. We learn that Harvey is planning on proposing to Grace once the election is out of the way, a surefire way of confirming that everything is about to go horribly wrong in a "this is my last tour of Vietnam and I can't wait to get home to see my gal" kind of way. It's unclear how much time has passed since his last proposal, Pamela Isley and Pretty Poison, but it suggests to us that Harvey is quick to fall in love and wants the stability that married life is alleged to provide. Perhaps there's also an element of him thinking that having someone love him will make him feel better about himself and reduce his mental woes. Of course, it doesn't actually work that way. When Harvey receives word that Thorne's men are being released due to an admin error with the arrest warrant, Big Bad Half comes out again and inadvertently smashes the sculpture in two while lashing out in frustration. Now there's some symbolism. Big Bad Half has no faith in the justice system. It's corrupt. People can be bought off. He'd much rather take the law into his own hands and dish out his brand of justice. See the parallel with Batman? Although I'd argue that Batman is far more compassionate and rarely resorts to physical violence as the first course of action in this show. Unless you're a low-level henchman, in which case Batman will send you to the hospital without even thinking about it. We learn more about Big Bad Half during the scene in Dr. Crest's office, where Harvey undergoes hypnotherapy. This is essentially an expositional scene. Dr. Crest explains the origins of Harvey's mental health crisis, that one bad day that cracked him to his very core and let Big Bad Half peer out, and there's something really quite sad about how mundane and pedestrian it was. Other villains suffer huge losses, such as Mr. Freeze losing his wife or Clayface having his humanity ripped away from him. But Harvey Dent suffered because he felt shame for being proud of hurting a bully. It was such a minor thing, and he bottled it up for so long, causing it to become a serious mental health issue, really underlining that shame is the strongest emotion. Shame is the feeling of not being good enough, of not being worthy of love or kindness. And Harvey Dent's reaction to his shame was to repress his anger until it became a festering psychological wound. The thing I learned from this story is never bottle up my emotions, or meet with gangsters in chemical plants in the middle of the night. It's just a recipe for disaster. There's something really poetic about the fact that Harvey Dent lost everything because of his efforts to keep his own mental health problems secret. It's almost like a Greek tragedy. Thorne threatens to release Harvey's medical file to the press if the DA's office refuses to work with him. Once again, we can see the sweat pouring down his brow as his anxieties build. Once again, the world around him becomes red. Once again, Harvey gnashes his teeth in anger. But very quickly, his feelings of anxiety and uncertainty peer through. We can clearly see that he's conflicted, feeling at least two emotions simultaneously. He's definitely angry, but he's also scared. He's clearly, desperately trying to maintain his composure until he stops. Compare this scene to when Dr. Crest asked Harvey to let Big Bad Half speak. It clearly caused some discomfort, and Harvey was reluctant to do so. This time, the anguish melts away as Harvey willingly hands over control to Big Bad Half. No struggle, no resistance. Just a flip of the coin and defeat. No words are uttered between Harvey and Big Bad Half, but it's clear that they've reached an agreement based on the smile on Big Bad Half's face and the lack of red in the background. He's been let out willingly, and he will never be repressed again. This short exchange between Harvey and Thorne is one of my favourite scenes in the entire series. Again, both the visuals and the vocal performance are wonderful.
There's just one problem.
What's that?
You're talking to the wrong Harvey.
It's so damn cool. Big Bad Half is clearly a force to be reckoned with, as he literally flings the rotund Rupert Thorne across the room and wrestles with several henchmen at once. Big Bad Half seems to be far more in control than the previous times he forced his way out earlier in the episode, and he chases after Thorne. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, bad things happen in Gotham City's chemical factories at night, and Harvey is caught in an explosion, severely injuring him. All of the fighting ceases, with Thorne and his henchmen nowhere to be seen. Just silence as Batman approaches his wounded friend. We don't see his face, but based on Batman's reaction, we know it's bad. The last few minutes of this episode are filled with tension as we wait for the inevitable moment when Harvey's new face is revealed. We know it's coming. We can see the wound peeking out from under the bandages at times, but we won't get a clear look at it right away. By not showing us his face immediately and seeing other people's reaction to his face, we are put in the position of Harvey, who is not able to see his own face until the last moments of the episode. This is emphasised by the shot of Harvey approaching the mirror. We're seeing what Harvey sees directly from his perspective, but are dramatically shoved from his perspective by the sickening scream. It's in this moment that Two-Face is born. He's not Harvey Dent, he's not Big Bad Harv. He's somebody else, and he cannot live the life that Harvey Dent had. After Grace faints at the sight of him, harsh, Two-Face vanishes through an open window, disappearing into the stormy night. To be continued. It's interesting to note that Alan Burnett didn't originally envisage this as a two-parter, but after turning in his script, writer Randy Rogel pitched a second part. After all, it's Two-Face, it has to be a two-parter. Unfortunately, while part 2 is a solid episode, it doesn't reach the same dizzying heights as part 1. Despite the simplified look at dissociative personality disorder, BTAS's Harvey Dent is one of the most relatable villains, and Two-Face's origin episode is profoundly sad. His downfall came as a result of very human emotions. Anger, shame, guilt. And it's one that really spoke to me as a child and had a lasting impact on me. I'm going to end this video by handing over to Bruce Timm to hear his thoughts on the episode.
For the very first time in the series, it's a show that is adult without being gratuitous. It's not adult in a sexy or violent way. It's a very sophisticated, grown-up kind of story. There's a lot of dialogue in it. It's a very dramatic story. There's still the crime element, and there's still Batman, being a superhero, but it's married to a real psychological, complex story arc of the, Harvey Dent becoming Two-Face. It's one of the absolute best of the series ever, and it's certainly, the best of the early episodes.
Well, that got a bit heavy, didn't it? Let me know your favourite episode in the comments, even if it is I've Got Batman in My Basement. Someone's got to love it.